So, grab a blanket, turn down the lights, and prepare yourself. This one's going to stay with you long after it's over. People say some stories aren't meant to be heard, let alone investigated. But what do you do when whispers become loud enough to catch the attention of someone who refuses to believe in the supernatural? That's exactly where our protagonist, Jamie, found himself. A skeptic in a town where myth and truth blurred together. He wasn't scared of ghost stories. He was scared of wasting his time. Yet there was something about this particular tale that felt different. It wasn't just a story people told for entertainment. It was something the whole town avoided, as if speaking about it would invite something terrible. Jamie wasn't your typical journalist. He didn't care about celebrity scandals or political drama. Instead, he made a career out of chasing stories others wouldn't touch. Urban legends, unexplained disappearances, haunted places. But unlike other so-called paranormal investigators, he didn't believe a word of it. For him, the thrill came from exposing hoaxes, debunking myths, and proving that behind every scary story was just fear and imagination. He was in his mid-30s, with a sharp jawline and eyes that always seemed to be scanning for something. Answers, clues, inconsistencies. His clothes were plain, a worn-out jacket, jeans, and a pair of boots that had seen one too many muddy trails. He didn't care about appearances, only results. But he wasn't cold or unkind. He listened to people, asked the right questions, and never dismissed anyone outright. That's how he got them to open up, to tell him things they wouldn't share with anyone else. Then came this story, different from the rest. It was about a small family in a remote town who had vanished without a trace. The house they lived in was now abandoned, left to decay as rumors spread about what had really happened. People whispered about a figure called the Collector, someone or something that took people away. No bodies, no evidence, just emptiness. At first, Jamie thought it was just another exaggeration. But as he read more, something gnawed at him. The lack of details, the silence from officials, and the fear in the locals' eyes, this wasn't just a story people told for fun. It was something deeper. He arrived in town late in the afternoon. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the quiet streets. It was the kind of place where time seemed to stand still. Old houses with peeling paint lined the road, and not a single person was outside. Jamie noted how eerily empty it felt, but he didn't stop to dwell on it. He had a job to do, and he wasn't about to let ghost stories get under his skin. His first stop was the local diner. Places like this were where you found the best leads. Not from police reports or news articles, but from the people who lived there. He pushed open the door, the bell above it jingling softly. The smell of coffee and frying bacon filled the air, but there was something off about the atmosphere. The few patrons inside glanced at him, their eyes lingering a little too long before turning back to their meals. It wasn't hostility, but it wasn't exactly welcoming either. Jamie walked to the counter, took a seat, and ordered a coffee. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a forced smile, brought it over without a word. He could feel her hesitation, the way she avoided meeting his gaze. But that was fine. He didn't need friendliness, just information. "Busy town," Jamie said, his tone casual but probing. He stirred his coffee slowly, watching for her reaction. "I heard something about a missing family. Know anything about that?" The woman stiffened, her hand tightening around the coffee pot. For a moment, Jamie thought she might refuse to answer. But then she glanced around, as if checking to see if anyone was listening, and leaned in slightly. "You shouldn't be asking about that," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "People around here don't talk about it. It's better that way." Jamie raised an eyebrow but didn't push her. He knew how this worked. People didn't like to be pressured, but they also didn't like to be ignored. So he nodded, sipped his coffee, and let the silence hang between them. It was a tactic he had used before, giving them space, making them feel like they were in control. And it worked. After a few moments, the waitress sighed, glancing around once more before speaking again. "It's the old house on Ridgeway Road," she said. "The family that lived there, they were good people, but one night they were just gone. No one knows what happened. No one wants to know." Jamie leaned forward slightly, his curiosity piqued. "Why not?" The waitress hesitated, biting her lip. "They say it's cursed," she said finally. That something lives there, something that watches. People who go looking for answers don't come back the same. Jamie didn't believe in curses. He believed in fear, in stories that grew with each retelling until they became something more. But there was something about the way she said it, the way her voice trembled slightly, that made him pause. "Thanks for the tip," he said, finishing his coffee and leaving a generous tip on the counter. "I'll check it out." The waitress didn't respond, but he could feel her eyes on him as he left the diner. Outside, the sun had dipped lower, casting an orange glow over the town. Jamie pulled out his phone, checking the map for Ridgeway Road. It wasn't far, just on the edge of town, near the woods. As he walked, he noticed how quiet everything was. No cars drove by, no children played in the streets. It was as if the town was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Jamie shook off the feeling, reminding himself that he didn't believe in ghost stories. But then, why did his hands feel cold, despite the warm evening air? He reached the house, just as the sun disappeared behind the horizon. It stood at the end of a long, overgrown driveway, its windows dark and empty. The paint was faded, peeling away in long strips, and the front porch sagged under its own weight. It looked like any other abandoned house, except for the way it made his skin crawl. Jamie took a deep breath, pulling out his flashlight. He wasn't scared. He was here to do a job. But as he stepped onto the porch, the wood creaking loudly under his weight, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. He knocked on the door, out of habit more than anything else. No answer, of course. He tried the handle. It was unlocked. He pushed it open slowly, the hinges groaning in protest. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with dust and something else he couldn't quite place. The walls were covered in faded wallpaper, peeling at the edges. Furniture sat untouched, as if the family had just stepped out for a moment and never returned. He should have turned back, but he didn't. Instead, he moved deeper into the house, the weight of silence pressing harder against him with each step. Then, he heard it. A faint creak above him, the sound of a floorboard shifting under pressure. He froze, flashlight aimed at the ceiling, but the sound didn't come again. Just the house settling, he told himself. But the tightness in his chest suggested otherwise. Jamie walked further inside, his footsteps echoing in the empty house. He noted the details, the photographs on the mantel, the worn rug in the living room, the faint smell of something metallic. But then, as he moved toward the stairs, he felt it. A presence, something watching him. He turned quickly, shining his flashlight behind him. Nothing, just the empty hallway, stretching back toward the front door. But the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it grew stronger. Jamie wasn't one to scare easily. But in that moment, standing alone in the dark house, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Doubt. The house felt alive, though it shouldn't have. The walls didn't breathe, but they pressed in, the air thick and suffocating. Jamie moved carefully through the rooms, each step stirring dust and a growing sense of unease. The family who once lived here had left everything behind. Plates still sat on the dining table, a child's toy truck lay abandoned in the corner, and a single shoe rested by the staircase, as though someone had been interrupted mid-step. It wasn't the first time Jamie had walked through a house like this, but this one was different. It felt like it didn't want him there. He should have turned back, but he didn't. Instead, he moved deeper into the house, the weight of silence pressing harder against him with each step. Then he heard it, a faint creak above him, the sound of a floorboard shifting under pressure. He froze, flashlight aimed at the ceiling, but the sound didn't come again. Just the house settling, he told himself. But the tightness in his chest suggested otherwise. Jamie climbed the stairs, each step groaning under his weight. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. Evidence, perhaps, or something to explain the family's disappearance. But also, he wanted proof that there was nothing here, that the locals had let their imaginations run wild. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched into darkness. The air was colder here, heavier. He tried the first door on the left. It opened with a low whine, revealing a small bedroom. The bed was neatly made, the room unnervingly tidy, as though no one had ever slept there. But on the nightstand, Jamie noticed a framed photograph. He picked it up, wiping the dust away with his sleeve. It was the family, a man, a woman, and a little boy, smiling brightly as if their world was perfect. Jamie stared at the image, but then his flashlight flickered. "Come on," he muttered, tapping the flashlight. The beam steadied, but the momentary darkness left him shaken. He set the photo back down and turned to leave. But as he stepped into the hallway, he felt it again. That presence, that oppressive weight bearing down on him. The next door opened into the master bedroom. This one wasn't as tidy. The bed was unmade, the sheets tangled and thrown aside. Clothes were scattered across the floor, and the mirror above the dresser was cracked. Jamie moved cautiously, his flashlight sweeping across the room. But then he saw it. A symbol carved into the wall above the bed, its lines jagged and uneven. He stepped closer, running his fingers over the grooves. It wasn't something he recognized, but it felt deliberate, purposeful. "What the hell were you into?" he whispered to himself, pulling out his phone to snap a photo. But as the flash went off, he heard a soft rustling behind him. He spun around, but the room was empty. The house was getting to him, but he refused to let fear take over. He moved to the next room, a child's bedroom. The walls were painted a soft blue, stickers of stars and moons scattered across the ceiling. A small bed sat in the corner, its blankets bunched up as though the child had just climbed out of it. Jamie's eyes fell on a drawing pinned to the wall, a crude sketch of a tall figure standing next to a small house. The figure had no face, just a black void where its features should have been. Jamie felt a chill run down his spine, but he told himself it was just a child's imagination. Kids drew weird things all the time. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that the drawing meant something, that it was a clue to whatever had happened here. He turned to leave the room, but then the door slammed shut behind him. The sound was deafening in the stillness, and Jamie's heart leapt into his throat. He rushed to the door, pulling it open, but the hallway was empty. "Okay, very funny," he called out, though his voice wavered. "If someone's here, you've made your point." Silence answered him, heavy and suffocating. He stepped back into the hallway, trying to steady his breathing. But then, at the far end of the hall, he saw something. A shadow, darker than the rest, standing perfectly still. Jamie's flashlight flickered again, and when the beam steadied, the shadow was gone. He stood frozen, his pulse hammering in his ears. But then he forced himself to move, to keep going. Fear was exactly what the town's stories thrived on, and he wouldn't give in to it. The last door led to the attic. The pull-down ladder creaked loudly as he unfolded it, the sound echoing through the house. He hesitated at the bottom, staring up into the darkness above. This was where the whispers had led him, where the story had been pointing all along. He climbed slowly, each rung groaning under his weight. The attic was cramped, the air thick with dust and the faint smell of decay. His flashlight swept across old trunks, stacks of yellowed newspapers, and cobweb-covered furniture. But in the far corner, something caught his eye. A small wooden chest, its surface covered in the same strange symbols he'd seen in the master bedroom. Jamie approached cautiously, his breath shallow. The chest seemed ancient, its wood worn and cracked with age. He knelt beside it, his fingers hovering over the latch. Every instinct told him to leave it alone, to walk away. But then, his curiosity got the better of him. He lifted the lid. Inside, he found more photographs, each one older and more faded than the last. They showed people, families, couples, children, all standing in front of the same house. But in every photo, standing in the background, was the tall, faceless figure from the child's drawing. Jamie's hands trembled as he sifted through the photos. Then, at the bottom of the chest, he found a journal. The leather cover was brittle, the pages yellowed with age. He opened it, scanning the first few entries. They spoke of strange noises in the night, of shadows that moved on their own, of a growing sense of dread that consumed the family. But as he read on, the entries became more erratic, more desperate. The writer spoke of the collector, a being that watched from the shadows, that took people away and erased all traces of their existence. Jamie's heart pounded as he reached the final entry, scrawled in shaky handwriting. "He's here. He's watching. There's no escape." Suddenly, the attic felt unbearably small, the air too thick to breathe. Jamie stood quickly, the journal clutched in his hand. But then, as he turned to leave, he saw it. In the far corner of the attic, where the shadows were deepest, something moved. A tall figure, its form barely distinguishable from the darkness, stepped forward. It had no face, no features, just an emptiness that seemed to draw the light into it. Jamie stumbled back, his flashlight flickering wildly. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure moved closer, its presence suffocating. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. Jamie didn't remember how he got out of the house. One moment he was in the attic, and the next he was outside, gasping for air under the cold night sky. The house loomed behind him, its windows dark and empty. But as he turned to leave, he felt it again, that presence, that oppressive weight. He glanced back one last time, and there it was, standing in the window, watching. The Collector. If you enjoyed this story and want more terrifying tales that blur the line between truth and nightmare, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Unexpected Horrors. Turn on notifications so you never miss our next chilling upload. Your support helps us bring you more stories just like this. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the scariest stories might just be true. Stay safe, stay curious, and we'll see you in the next one.